I came home on Christmas Eve with a warm pecan pie in one hand and a small gift for my grandson in the other, expecting candlelight laughter and family. Instead, the front door rejected me. The code I had used for years flashed red again and again. From inside my own house, I heard dinner plates Christmas music and people laughing like I was already gone. Then my daughter-in-law opened the door just 3 inches and said, "We changed the code, Autumn. This house needs new rules." She didn't know I had an old deed folded inside my coat pocket. And before dessert was served, that paper would ruin everything. If this story touches your heart, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes, knowing someone is listening from somewhere far away makes a painful story feel a little less lonely. Before that, Christmas Eve, before the red light blinked on the keypad and told me I was no longer welcome, my house had always been the safest place I knew. It sat at the end of a quiet street in a small suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, with a maple tree in the front yard and a narrow brick walkway my husband David laid with his own hands. The bricks were never perfectly even. One corner always lifted a little after the first frost, and every spring David would say, "I'll fix that before summer," then forget because he was too busy fixing something for somebody else. That was the kind of man he was. We bought the house when we were still young enough to believe life would give us time to do everything. Back then, the kitchen had yellow wallpaper, the upstairs bathroom leaked, and the basement smelled like dust and old paint. But David walked through those rooms like he was walking through a dream. "Autumn," he said, standing in the empty living room with his hands on his hips. "This is where we're going to grow old." I laughed because we were barely 30 and growing old sounded like something that happened to other people. But he was right. We grew older in that house. We raised our son there. We celebrated birthdays, Christmas mornings, school awards, job promotions, and quiet Sundays when nothing special happened except coffee, sunlight, and peace. For more than 30 years, every corner of that house held a piece of my life. The scratch on the pantry door came from Michael's toy truck when he was 5. The stain near the fireplace happened the year David spilled cranberry punch during a Christmas party and tried to blame it on the dog. The small dent in the hallway wall came from the night Michael came home from college with laundry bags so heavy he knocked into it and pretended not to notice. After David passed, those marks became more than damage. They became proof that my life had happened. Grief has a strange way of making a house feel too big and too small at the same time. Too big because every room echoes. Too small because every memory presses against your chest until you can hardly breathe. For months after David's funeral, I would still make coffee for 2. I would still turn toward his chair when the evening news came on. I would still wake up some mornings thinking I heard him in the garage, moving tools around like he always did. Then I would remember. Michael tried to visit when he could. He had always been a good son, in the gentle ways, the easy ways. He called on Sundays, brought me groceries when snow was coming, and kissed my cheek when he left. But he had a wife, a child, bills work, and a life moving faster than mine. I understood that. Then about 2 years after David died, Michael called me one night, sounding like a boy again. "Mom," he said, "can I ask you something without you panicking?" That sentence alone made me panic. He told me he had made a bad investment with a friend from work. Some kind of rental property deal that was supposed to turn into quick profit. The repairs cost more than expected. The partner backed out. The market shifted. Then came credit cards, late payments, and the kind of silence people keep when they are ashamed. I listened without interrupting, but my heart sank deeper with every word. "How bad is it?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Bad enough that we might lose the townhouse if we don't get some breathing room." I remember sitting at my kitchen table with one hand wrapped around David's old coffee mug, looking at the empty chair across from me. I knew what David would have said. He would have said, "Family helps family." He would have said, "Michael was our son." He would have said, A house with empty bedrooms should not stay empty when your child needs shelter. So I said what any mother with a soft heart and a lifetime of love would say. "Come home for a while." Michael cried. I could hear him trying to hide it, but I knew my son's breathing. I knew the way his voice cracked when pride lost its fight. "It'll only be temporary," he promised, "just until we get back on our feet." Claire got on the phone after him. Back then, she still sounded sweet to me. "Autumn, I can't thank you enough," she said. "Really? You're saving us?" I told her not to talk like that. I told her families weren't banks and love wasn't a loan. She laughed softly and called me Mom, and I let myself believe that maybe the house would feel alive again. For a while, it did. Ethan came running through the front door the first day with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders and a grin wide enough to break my heart open. He was 10, then all elbows and bright eyes, still young enough to hug me in front of his parents without embarrassment. "Grandma, do I get my old room?" he asked. "You get the room with the blue curtains," I told him. "And if your mother says yes, you can help me make pancakes on Saturday." Claire smiled at that. Michael carried boxes upstairs. I cooked a pot roast that night because it was the kind of meal that made a house smell forgiving. We sat at the table together, and for the first time since David died, I didn't hear the silence. I heard forks tapping plates. I heard Ethan talking about school. I heard Michael laugh. I thought maybe God had given me something back. The changes came slowly, so slowly that at first I mistook them for normal adjustments. Claire asked if she could move a few things around in the kitchen because she cooked differently than I did. I said yes. She asked if she could clear one shelf in the linen closet. I said of course. She asked if she could put some of my old holiday decorations in storage because minimal looks cleaner. I told myself not to be sensitive. A young family needed space. That was the excuse I gave everything. Then one afternoon, I came home from church and found my lace curtains folded in a box by the stairs. In their place were gray panels that made the living room look like a furniture showroom. Claire stood near the window holding a measuring tape. "I hope you don't mind," she said, without sounding like she cared whether I did. The old ones made the room feel dated. Those curtains had been a Mother's Day gift from David. He had pretended he picked them himself, though I later found out my sister helped him. I touched the folded fabric in the box and felt something inside me bend. "They were special to me," I said quietly. Claire's face softened for half a second, but then she shrugged. "We can keep them somewhere safe." Somewhere safe turned out to be a plastic bin in the basement. After that, more pieces of my life began disappearing. The rooster cookie jar David bought me in Tennessee. The framed cross-stitch my mother made when Michael was born. The old rocking chair in the corner where I used to sit with Ethan when he was a baby. Claire never threw things away in front of me. She boxed them, labeled them, and moved them out of sight. Somehow, that made it worse. It was like she wasn't destroying my life. She was archiving it. Whenever I mentioned anything, Michael gave me the same tired smile. "Claire just wants to make the house feel fresh, Mom." Fresh. That word started to hurt. Fresh meant my memories were stale. Fresh meant David's things were clutter. Fresh meant I was supposed to be grateful that my own home was being improved without my permission. One evening, I found Claire in the hallway, taking down a framed photograph of David and me from our 25th anniversary. We were standing beside Lake Erie in the picture wind, whipping my hair across my face while David laughed with his arm around me. "Where are you putting that?" I asked. Claire glanced at it like it was a receipt she didn't need. "I thought we could do a family gallery wall," she said. "Something more current. David is family." The words came out sharper than I meant them to. She blinked, then smiled that careful smile people use when they want to make you feel unreasonable. "Of course he is. I just mean the people living here now." The people living here now. I carried that sentence around for days. Ethan noticed more than anyone. Children always do. Adults think they can hide cruelty behind politeness, but children hear the tone. They see who gets interrupted. They see who gets smaller in their own chair. At night, Ethan would come sit with me while I folded laundry or watered the plants David had kept alive for years. "Grandma," he asked once, "do you miss Grandpa every day?" I looked at his sweet face and felt tears gather. "Yes," I said, "but some days I remember him more than I miss him." "What does that mean?" "It means love doesn't always hurt. Sometimes it keeps you company." He nodded like he understood, even though I knew he was still learning. Those talks with Ethan became my comfort. He wanted stories about David. He wanted to know how his grandfather proposed, how he fixed the old porch swing, how he used to sing off key while painting the kitchen. I told him everything because I was afraid if I stopped speaking David's name, the house would forget him too. Claire did not like those conversations. One night, as Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table looking through an old photo album, she walked in and said, "Ethan has homework. He doesn't need to spend all evening in the past. That was what she called my life. I closed the album gently. I did not argue. At my age, people expect you to swallow things. They call it wisdom when really it is exhaustion. But something had begun to shift in me. Not anger exactly, not yet. More like a quiet warning inside my chest. Then came the day Claire suggested the electronic lock. It was early December, and she had been ordering Christmas decorations online for a week. Boxes arrived almost daily. White garlands, gold ornaments matching stockings with embroidered names. Mine was not among them, but I told myself maybe she hadn't finished ordering. We were in the kitchen when she placed her phone in front of Michael and me. "I think we should install one of these," she said. On the screen was a sleek, smart lock with a keypad. Michael barely looked up from his coffee. "For the front door?" "For all exterior doors eventually," Claire said. "It's safer. We can give people codes, delete old ones, track who comes in and out." I felt my shoulders tighten. "We've had the same lock for 20 years, I said. "It works fine." Claire smiled. Autumn with respect, the world has changed. With respect was Claire's favorite way to say something disrespectful. Michael looked between us and cleared his throat. "It might not be a bad idea, Mom. For safety." I stared at the phone. The lock looked harmless, modern, convenient. Just another little change like curtains, photographs, storage bins, and gray walls. But something about it felt different. A curtain could make me sad. A box could make me feel forgotten. A lock could keep me out. "I'll think about it," I said. Claire picked up her phone, and for the first time that morning, her smile reached her eyes. "Of course," she said, "but we really should do it before Christmas." And I remember the way the kitchen went quiet after that, the way the winter light fell across David's empty chair, the way my own hands suddenly felt cold. I did not know it then, but Claire had already stopped thinking of that house as mine. She was only waiting for me to stop fighting the idea. The first time I truly felt like a guest in my own home was not when Claire changed the curtains or packed away my old decorations. It was the day I came downstairs with my coffee and found my reading chair gone. That chair had sat beside the front window for almost 18 years. David bought it for me after my first knee surgery, saying every woman deserved one place in the house where nobody asked her to get up and help. It was soft in all the wrong places, faded at the arms, and leaned slightly to the left if you sat too quickly. But it knew my body. It knew my grief. It knew every morning I had watched the sunrise after David died, because sleep would not stay with me. That morning, the space beside the window was empty. In its place stood a tall, decorative plant in a white ceramic pot. I stared at it for a long moment, holding my coffee so tightly the mug warmed my palms. "Claire," I called. She came in from the dining room wearing yoga pants and that bright, busy expression she always had when she wanted me to believe she was doing something helpful. "Oh, good, you noticed," she said. "Doesn't it open up the room?" "Where is my chair?" Her smile faltered just a little. "In the basement. Just for now." For now. It was making the room feel crowded. And honestly, autumn, it didn't match anything. I looked at the empty spot again. Outside, the maple tree had lost nearly all its leaves, and the sky was the dull gray of early December. That chair had been where I sat to watch the world when the world felt too heavy to walk through. "It matched me," I said. Claire laughed softly like I had made a joke. "Don't be dramatic. We can always bring it back later." But later never came. That became the pattern. Nothing was thrown away. Nothing was taken permanently, not according to Claire. Everything was just moved, just updated, just stored just for now. But each small change made the house feel less like mine and more like a place where my memories needed permission to remain. A week after the chair disappeared, I found my wedding photograph missing from the mantel. David and I had been standing outside the little Baptist church where we married, both of us too young and too poor to know what we were doing. My dress had lace sleeves. My mother altered herself. David's suit was borrowed from his older cousin and a little too wide in the shoulders. We looked nervous, hopeful, and completely unprepared for the life ahead of us. That photograph had been on the mantel since the day we moved in. Now it was gone. In its place was a framed portrait of Michael, Claire, and Ethan taken at a fall festival. They wore matching navy sweaters and smiled in front of pumpkins. It was a beautiful picture. That was part of what hurt. I found my wedding photo later on the bookshelf in the hallway, half hidden behind a stack of magazines. When I asked Michael about it that evening, he rubbed the back of his neck and looked toward the kitchen where Claire was loading the dishwasher loudly enough to hear every plate. "Mom, it's just decorating," he said. "Your father's picture was on that mantel for 30 years. "I know. Then why didn't anyone ask me?" He sighed, tired, before the conversation had even begun. "Claire is trying to make the place feel like home for everyone." I looked at my son, my only child, and wondered when everyone had stopped including me. I wanted to say that out loud. I wanted to ask him if he understood what it felt like to watch his father disappear piece by piece. But Michael had dark circles under his eyes and a bill from some collection agency sticking out of his work bag. I swallowed my hurt because mothers are trained to notice everyone else's pain before their own. Still, swallowing pain does not make it vanish. It only teaches it where to hide. The humiliation sharpened one Saturday afternoon when Claire invited 2 women from her church group over for coffee. I had been upstairs folding towels when I heard voices in the living room. I started down the stairs, then paused when I heard my name. "Autumn is still living with us," Claire said. "Still living with us." The words landed like a slap. One of the women said, "That must be an adjustment." Claire gave a small laugh. "It is, but we're making it work. Older people get attached to routines, you know." I stood on the stairs with a towel pressed against my chest and felt my face burn. Still living with us. As if I had shown up with a suitcase and nowhere else to go. As if they had opened their door to me. As if the mortgage, the taxes, the repairs, the winter heating bills, the roof. David and I replaced with money we had saved for a vacation. All of that had somehow become invisible because Claire had bought new throw pillows. I did not go downstairs. I returned to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed until the women left. Then I took out the old checkbook register David used to keep in a shoebox. I do not know why. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I needed to see his handwriting beside all those payments, all those years of discipline and sacrifice. Roof repair, property tax, furnace, insurance, mortgage. Line after line, year after year, our life was written in blue ink. That evening, Linda Patterson from next door waved me over while I was bringing the trash bin back from the curb. Linda had lived beside us for 22 years. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed if your porch light burned out and brought soup when someone died. "Autumn," she said carefully, "are you doing all right?" "Of course," I answered, because that is what women my age say when they are not all right. Linda frowned. "Claire mentioned something about your family taking over the house." I didn't want to pry, but it sounded sudden. The cold air seemed to pass straight through my coat. Taking over Linda looked uncomfortable. "She said you were ready to downsize and that Michael and Claire would be handling the property soon. I assumed you had plans." I forced a smile that hurt my cheeks. "No," I said. "No plans like that." Linda's face softened with concern. "I thought you should know." I thanked her and walked back across the yard with my trash bin rattling behind me. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from something heavier. Claire had not just been moving furniture. She had been moving the story. She was telling people a version of my life where I had already agreed to step aside. That night, I called Grace Miller. Grace had been my closest friend since our boys played Little League together. She was blunt, loyal, and allergic to nonsense. Before retiring, she had worked for a law office downtown, and she still had that sharp way of listening, like she was sorting truth from performance. I told her everything. The chair, the photograph, the church women, Linda's warning. For a while, Grace said nothing. Then she asked, "Autumn, whose name is on that house?" "Mine," I said. "Mine and David's originally. After he passed, everything transferred to me." "You're sure?" "I think so." "You think so?" Her voice grew firm. "Listen to me. Letting your son and his wife stay with you does not make them owners. It does not give Claire the right to erase you. It does not give her the right to speak for you. And it certainly does not give her the right to prepare the neighborhood for your removal." The word removal made my stomach twist. "Grace, I don't want to accuse anyone of anything. You don't have to accuse. You have to verify." I closed my eyes. Grace softened then. "Honey, I know you love Michael. I know you love Ethan. But love is not the same as surrender." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed. The house hummed around me. The refrigerator clicked on. Pipes creaked in the walls. Upstairs, I could hear Ethan's faint footsteps crossing his room. I thought about David. There are moments in grief when memory arrives so clearly it feels less like remembering and more like being visited. That night, I heard David's voice in my mind as plainly as if he were sitting across from me. "Autumn, keep the deeds safe." He had said it years ago after we paid off the house. We were standing in the bedroom, and he had handed me a thick envelope from the county recorder's office. I had laughed at how serious he looked. "David, it's just paperwork." "No," he said. "It's protection." "Protection from what?" He shrugged, but his eyes stayed serious. "From confusion, from pressure, from anybody who forgets what you built." At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. David had grown up poor, and people who grow up poor often treat paperwork like a shield. He kept receipts, warranties, tax records, insurance letters, everything. I used to tease him that if the dishwasher ever broke, he could prove exactly what day we bought it and what shirt he was wearing. But now his warning returned with weight. I stood up from the table and went to the hall closet, the one Claire had not yet reorganized, because it mostly held coats, umbrellas, and old boxes nobody wanted to lift. On the top shelf behind a stack of Christmas tins was a small metal lockbox with a brass latch. My hands trembled as I brought it down. Inside were birth certificates, insurance papers, David's military discharge documents, our marriage license, and several envelopes tied together with a rubber band that had dried and cracked with age. I searched slowly, afraid of what I might find, and more afraid of what I might not. At the bottom of the box was a yellowed envelope with David's handwriting across the front. House. Important. Do not discard. My throat tightened. I ran my fingers over the letters. He had pressed hard with the pen the way he always did, leaving grooves in the paper. For a moment, I could almost feel his hand covering mine. Behind me, the house was quiet. Upstairs slept my son, who kept asking me not to make trouble. Down the hall slept my grandson, who still believed adults told the truth. In the guest room slept Claire, who had already begun speaking of my home as if I were merely waiting to leave it. I held the envelope against my chest. I did not open it that night. Not yet. But for the first time in weeks, I did not feel helpless. I felt warned. The Sunday before Christmas, Claire announced she was hosting a dinner. She did not ask me. She did not say, "Autumn, would you mind if we invited a few people over?" She simply stood in the kitchen with her phone in one hand and a grocery list in the other and said, "We'll need the dining room cleared by 5. I was peeling potatoes at the sink. The radio was playing low some old Christmas hymn David used to hum off-key, and for one foolish second I thought I had misunderstood her. Cleared for what I asked. Claire glanced up. Dinner. My parents are coming, and my sister's family. Maybe the Robertsons from church, too. I set the peeler down slowly. That sounds like a lot of people. It's Christmas week, she said, as if that settled everything. People gather, they do, I said. But usually the person who owns the house knows about it first. Her mouth tightened, but only for a moment. Claire was very good at recovering. She smiled in that smooth way of hers and reached past me for a cabinet. I thought you'd be happy. You've been saying the house feels quiet. I had said that once, months earlier, on a rainy afternoon when I missed David so badly, I could hardly breathe. Claire had a gift for turning a vulnerable sentence into permission. Michael came in from the garage, then carrying a box of outdoor lights. His cheeks were red from the cold, and he looked between us like a man who already knew he had stepped into trouble. "Did Claire tell you about dinner?" he asked. "She did," I said. He gave me a small, apologetic smile. "It'll be nice, Mom. Just family and a few friends." Family. I wondered how a word could sound so warm in one person's mouth and so sharp in another's. By 5 o'clock, my house no longer felt like my house. Claire had removed my red table runner and replaced it with a white one that looked too clean to touch. She put gold chargers under the plates and tied linen napkins with little sprigs of fake pine. My old ceramic Santa, the one Ethan loved because its nose had chipped years ago, was gone from the sideboard. In its place were tall silver candles that smelled like cinnamon and something expensive. I helped because standing still would have made me cry. I mashed potatoes. I warmed rolls. I wiped counters that were already spotless. Every time I reached for something, Claire corrected me. "Not that bowl, Autumn, the glass one. Could you put those on the smaller platter? Actually, maybe let me do the gravy." It was the politeness that wore me down. Open cruelty is easier to fight. Polite cruelty makes you question whether you are being too sensitive. The guests arrived with coats, laughter, perfume, and bottles of wine. Claire's parents, Patricia and Howard, swept in like they were entering their daughter's new home. Her sister Megan kissed the air beside my cheek and said, "This place looks completely different. Claire, you've done wonders." Claire smiled. "We're getting there. Getting there." I stood near the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in my hand and felt something cold move through me. Michael's co-workers from church, the Robertsons, arrived next. I barely knew them, but they greeted Claire like the hostess and me like a sweet older relative who had wandered into the room. Then Claire clapped her hands lightly. "Everyone come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready. Autumn is helping us tonight, helping us. In my own kitchen." I saw Michael look at me, then look away. At dinner, Claire seated her father at the head of the table. That chair had been David's chair. After he died, I could not bring myself to sit there, but I also never let anyone else claim it casually. On holidays, I left it empty, not out of sadness exactly, but out of respect. It was my quiet way of saying that David Walker had existed, that his place was not so easily filled. But Howard sat there without hesitation, unfolding his napkin over his lap. Claire placed me near the far end of the table beside Megan's teenage daughter and across from the Robertsons. Ethan sat 2 chairs away from me, close enough to glance over, but too far for me to touch his hand. Michael sat beside Claire, looking tense and tired. Before anyone ate, Howard raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. Everyone smiled. I looked down at my plate. The food was good, though I could hardly taste it. Conversation moved around me like traffic I could not enter. Claire talked about renovations she wanted to make in the spring. She mentioned opening the wall between the kitchen and dining room. She talked about replacing the upstairs carpet painting, the exterior, updating the landscaping. Patricia leaned forward, delighted. "That would increase the value tremendously." Claire's eyes flicked toward me. "Exactly." I felt my fork pause halfway to my mouth. Howard wiped his lips with his napkin. "It's smart. Houses need to evolve, especially when the next generation is going to maintain them." The next generation. No one looked at me when he said it. I tried to breathe normally. I tried to remind myself that not every careless sentence was an attack. But then Megan turned to me with a bright smile. "Autumn, Claire mentioned you might be considering a senior community. My friend's mother moved into one near Dublin, and she loves it. They have card nights, transportation, all of that." My face went hot. "I'm not considering that," I said. The table quieted just enough for everyone to notice. Claire set down her wine glass. "We've only discussed possibilities." "No," I said, still calm, though my heart was pounding. "We have not." Michael shifted in his chair. "Mom," I looked at him, and whatever he saw in my face made him stop. Claire gave a soft laugh, the kind meant to rescue a room from discomfort. "Autumn is very independent. That's one of the things we love about her." Patricia nodded sympathetically, as if independence at my age were a charming problem. "There's no shame in needing less responsibility," Patricia said. "A house this size is a lot for one person." "It hasn't been too much for me," I replied. "I've taken care of it for 30 years. Claire's smile thinned. "And no one is taking that away from you." But the way she said it told me that taking it away was exactly what she had been discussing. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He stared down at his plate, pushing green beans with his fork. He knew. Maybe not every detail, but he knew enough to feel the wrongness sitting at that table like another guest. The conversation stumbled forward. Someone mentioned weather. Someone else talked about church services. I answered when spoken to and stayed silent when not. Inside, however, something was no longer silent. I thought about the envelope in the lockbox. I had moved it from the hall closet to the pocket of my winter coat earlier that day. I had not opened it yet, but I had carried it with me from room to room, like a promise. After dessert plates were brought out, Claire stood. "There's something Michael and I have been meaning to talk with Autumn about after Christmas," she said. My son looked up sharply. "Claire." She ignored him. "Nothing dramatic." She continued smiling at the guests. "Just a family arrangement, practical things, paperwork. At a certain point, families have to plan ahead." My skin prickled. "What paperwork?" I asked. Claire folded her hands in front of her. "We don't need to get into it tonight. You brought it up tonight." A small silence opened. Claire's eyes hardened, though her mouth stayed pleasant. "Only because everyone here understands how important it is to protect family assets." Family assets, not memories, not home, not safety. Assets. Michael whispered, "Claire, enough." But it was not enough. Not for her. Not anymore. She looked around the table, gathering support from faces that did not understand the full story. "I just think it's responsible. Michael is the only child. Ethan will inherit someday. It makes sense to put things in order before there's confusion." I stared at my son. "Is that what you think too?" Michael's mouth opened, then closed. His silence told me more than any answer could have. I stood slowly, taking my plate to the kitchen, because my hands needed something to do before my heart broke in public. No one followed at first. I rinsed the plate under water that ran too hot over my fingers. Then I heard Claire's voice in the dining room, lower than before, but not low enough. "Once she signs, this house is finally ours." The water kept running. For a moment, I could not move. The words did not shock me as much as they should have. Maybe some part of me had known all along. Maybe every missing photograph, every boxed-up memory, every conversation about fresh starts and new rules had been leading to that one sentence. This house is finally ours. I turned off the faucet and looked toward the dark kitchen window. My reflection stared back at me, older, tired, hurt, but not stupid. In that reflection, I saw the woman David had trusted with the deed. I saw the mother who had opened her home out of love. I saw the widow who had confused peacekeeping with surrender. And I made myself one promise. Before Claire ever put a pen in my hand, I was going to know exactly what David had left me. I waited 3 days before opening the envelope. 3 days of pretending everything was normal. 3 days of listening to Claire discuss Christmas decorations, dinner plans, and gift lists while her words from that dinner table echoed inside my head. Once she signs, this house is finally ours. Sometimes people reveal themselves by accident. Sometimes they reveal themselves because they believe they have already won. The Tuesday after that dinner, Michael left early for work. Ethan had school. Claire drove to a shopping center with one of her friends to buy decorations. The house finally became quiet. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table where David and I had spent thousands of mornings together. And I opened the envelope. The paper inside smelled faintly of dust and old filing cabinets. Some pages had yellowed around the edges. Others were surprisingly clean. David had always protected important documents inside plastic sleeves. At the top of the stack sat the original deed. I read every line slowly. Our names, the property description, the county recording information, the transfer records. My hands trembled. Below it was another document I had almost forgotten existed. After David died, our attorney had helped complete the transfer paperwork. I remembered signing papers during those awful weeks when grief made everything blurry. I read the final page twice. Sole ownership transferred to Autumn Walker. My name. Only my name. No Michael, no trust, no shared ownership, no rights belonging to anyone else. For several minutes, I simply sat there staring at the paper. I did not feel victorious. I felt confused. How could I own something so completely and yet feel so unwelcome inside it? I heard David's voice again. Protection. That was the word he had used. Protection from confusion. Protection from pressure. Protection from people who forgot. At the very bottom of the envelope was a folded note written in David's handwriting. The sight of it nearly broke me. I unfolded it carefully. Autumn. If you're reading this years from now, then I hope I'm simply being overly cautious, like you always say. But houses sometimes become more than houses. People forget the sacrifices behind walls. This home belongs to you as much as it belongs to our memories. Don't ever let guilt make decisions that wisdom should make. Love. David. I pressed the paper against my lips. For the first time since David died, I cried the way I had wanted to cry for months. Not the quiet tears people allow themselves, real tears. The kind that leave you exhausted. The kind that wash something clean. Later that afternoon, I called Grace. "Can you come over?" I asked. She arrived within 30 minutes carrying coffee and the expression of a woman prepared to defend someone. We sat in the dining room while winter sunlight stretched across the floor. I handed her the documents. Grace put on her Retzing glasses and began studying them carefully. She had spent years working for attorneys, reviewing files, organizing records, and preparing documents. She read slowly, moving each page into a separate pile. I watched her face. Finally, she looked up. "Autumn, do you understand what this means?" "I think so." "No, I mean legally." I stayed quiet. She tapped the deed. "This house belongs entirely to you." "I know." "No, listen to me. Michael doesn't own it. Claire doesn't own it. They don't have partial ownership. They don't have automatic rights. They don't get to make decisions because they're your family." I folded my hands together. "They live here. They live here because you allowed it." Grace pointed toward the hallway. "They are guests." The word felt almost cruel. Guests. Michael was my son. Ethan was my grandson. But Claire, had she forgotten that she entered this house because I opened the door? Grace continued reading. When she reached David's note, her eyes softened. "Oh, David." She read it twice before carefully setting it aside. He knew. Knew what? He knew people change when property is involved. I looked toward the window. Snow had begun falling lightly outside. "Michael wouldn't do that." Grace studied me. "Maybe not. But is Michael making the decisions?" I did not answer, because I already knew. Claire had become the loudest voice in the house. That evening, after everyone returned home, I watched things differently. Claire came inside carrying shopping bags. "We found beautiful new centerpieces," she announced. Michael helped her unload boxes. Ethan showed me a Christmas ornament he had made at school. The house looked ordinary, but ordinary things can hide dangerous intentions. During dinner, Claire spoke about future renovations. "We should update the upstairs bathroom after New Year's." We should probably remove the carpet." We could open the kitchen wall." Every sentence assumed ownership. Every sentence assumed authority. Finally, I asked, "Have you talked to a contractor?" Claire smiled. "Not officially." "Why?" "Just thinking ahead." "Ahead to what?" Michael glanced up. Claire cut her chicken calmly. "Long-term plans." I noticed Ethan watching us. I changed the subject. Later that night, after everyone went upstairs, I sat in the living room with the documents beside me. The Christmas tree lights reflected against the windows. David's chair remained empty. I imagined what he would tell me. Not to panic, not to accuse, but not to ignore. The next morning, Grace called. "I've been thinking." "That's dangerous," I said. She laughed. "You need to speak with Robert Hayes." The name immediately brought back memories. Robert had been our attorney for years. He handled David's will, our refinancing paperwork decades ago, and several legal documents after David passed. He was nearly retired now. I don't want to make this legal. Talking to a lawyer doesn't make it legal. I hesitated. It makes it informed. That afternoon, I found Robert's number inside an old address book. My hand shook slightly while dialing. A receptionist answered. When I explained who I was, she placed me on hold. A minute later, I heard Robert's voice. Autumn Walker. His voice had aged, but not much. Robert, I'm very sorry we haven't spoken in years. So am I. We exchanged small talk. He asked about Michael. He mentioned his wife retiring. For a few moments, it felt like stepping backward in time. Then he became serious. What can I help you with? I looked toward the staircase. Claire's footsteps moved upstairs. I lowered my voice. I found David's papers. Silence. And I think I need to understand something. He listened while I explained. Not everything, not yet, but enough. When I finished, Robert spoke carefully. The documents you described are very clear. So the house belongs to me. Yes. And nobody else. Correct. I swallowed. What if people living there begin acting as though they own it? Robert was quiet. Autumn, are you being pressured? No, not exactly. Are you being asked to sign anything? Not yet. Another pause. Keep the documents safe. His words sounded almost identical to David's. Would you be willing to meet after Christmas? Of course. We scheduled an appointment for the following week. After I hung up, I felt something I had not felt in months. Strength, not anger, not revenge, simply strength. That evening, Grace came by again. She brought lemon cake and her usual honesty. Do they know you've talked to Robert? No. Good. I frowned. Why good? Because information is power. I hated hearing that. Families shouldn't operate like battlefields. But Grace shook her head. Autumn, you're still thinking like a mother. What else would I think like? She reached across the table. A homeowner. That word sat between us. Homeowner. Not burden. Not guest. Not obstacle. Owner. Before she left, Grace stood in the doorway and looked back at me. One more thing. What? If somebody wants you to sign paperwork after Christmas, don't sign a single page. A chill passed through me. What makes you think they'll ask? Grace gave me a sad smile. Because people don't spend months rearranging a house they don't intend to claim. That night, while everyone slept, I moved the deed, David's note, and every important document into a new folder. I placed it inside my winter coat hanging near the front door. I do not know why I chose that spot. Maybe because I wanted it close. Maybe because some part of me already knew Christmas was coming. And something inside my own house was quietly moving toward me. Christmas Eve arrived carrying snow. The kind of snow David used to love. Large flakes drifted past the kitchen windows while soft music played from the radio. Years ago, he would have gone outside before sunrise to string lights along the porch railings, insisting that Christmas deserved to be visible from the street. He always said that people driving home late needed to see at least one house that looked hopeful. That morning, I woke before everyone else. Old habits are difficult to break. I baked the sweet potato casserole David loved. I prepared the cornbread stuffing recipe that had belonged to my mother. I made cranberry sauce from scratch because Ethan always preferred it to the canned kind. For a few hours, while the house remained quiet, I almost felt like myself again. The kitchen belonged to me. The smells belonged to me. The memories belonged to me. Then Claire came downstairs. She stopped in the doorway wearing a cream-colored sweater and holding her coffee cup. "Oh," she said. You already started. I smiled. I thought I'd make the casserole. She walked closer and lifted the foil. You still use marshmallows. David always liked it that way. She closed the dish. I already ordered a different version from the bakery. My smile faded. I've made this every Christmas for 37 years. I know. She spoke gently, almost kindly. But maybe we should modernize the menu a little. Modernize. That word again. As though tradition were some kind of illness. As long as Ethan gets some, I said quietly. Claire turned toward the refrigerator. We'll see if there's room on the table. By noon, the house looked like a magazine. Claire had decorated every surface with gold candles, white ribbon, and artificial greenery. She had rearranged furniture to create better flow. She had even replaced the old Christmas music station with a playlist from her phone. David's favorite Nat King Cole album remained in the cabinet, unplayed. Michael spent most of the afternoon outside hanging lights with Ethan. He seemed nervous, distracted. Several times I caught him looking at Claire and then quickly looking away. I wanted to ask him what was wrong. I wanted to ask whether he knew what his wife was planning. But every conversation between us lately felt like stepping onto thin ice. Around 4 o'clock, Claire disappeared upstairs. She returned carrying several wrapped gifts. One package immediately caught my attention. It was rectangular, thin, the size of a folder. She placed it beneath the tree. Our eyes met for only a second. She smiled. I felt cold. The guests arrived shortly after 5. Claire's parents, her sister Megan, the Robertsons, 2 of Michael's co-workers, several people from church. The house became loud and bright and crowded. Everyone complimented the decorations. Everyone praised Claire's hosting. No one asked who had spent 30 years building the home around them. I stayed busy. I poured drinks. I warmed rolls. I carried dishes. I smiled. Older women learn how to become invisible politely. Then came dinner. When I entered the dining room, I stopped. My place card sat at the far end of the table. The seat beside me was empty until Ethan quietly moved there. At the head of the table sat Howard again. David's chair. Something inside me hurt. Claire noticed me looking. "Oh, I hope that's okay," she said. "Dad has trouble hearing, so we put him closer to everyone." Howard smiled awkwardly. I sat down. For several minutes, conversation flowed around me. Jobs, vacation plans, school, housing prices, interest rates. Claire seemed especially interested in housing prices. "Property values around here have increased tremendously," she said. Howard nodded. "This neighborhood is worth a fortune now." Claire looked around the dining room. "It really is an investment." Investment. Not home. Not memories. Investment. I noticed Michael staring at his plate. Then Claire reached beneath the table and handed me a small gift bag. "Merry Christmas, Autumn." Several people smiled. I opened the tissue paper. Inside sat a colorful brochure, Senior Living Communities of Central Ohio. My fingers froze. The room became quiet. Patricia spoke first. "Oh, those places are wonderful now." Claire smiled brightly. "We just thought it might help you look at options. No pressure." No pressure. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I opened the brochure. Photographs of smiling elderly couples, exercise classes, apartments, transportation services, assisted living, independent living. I looked at Claire. "Why would you give me this?" She folded her hands. "Because we care about your future." "My future? You've mentioned feeling lonely. I never said I wanted to leave my home." Michael finally spoke. "Claire," she interrupted him. "Michael and I worry about you. The stairs, the maintenance, the responsibility." I set the brochure beside my plate. The responsibility hasn't bothered me for 30 years. Claire smiled. Things change. Across from me, Ethan looked frightened. The Robertsons suddenly became very interested in their potatoes. Patricia cleared her throat. It's wise to plan ahead. I looked around the table. Everyone seemed uncomfortable. Everyone except Claire. She looked prepared, rehearsed, as though this moment had been waiting inside her for weeks. Then she said the words that finally broke something inside me. Michael deserves the opportunity to build his future too. I stared at her. What does that mean? She shrugged lightly. It means someday this house should benefit the next generation. This house? Yes. My house? The room became silent. Michael whispered, Claire, please. She turned toward me. Autumn, nobody is trying to hurt you. Then why are you discussing where I should live? Because eventually difficult decisions have to be made. I looked at my son. He would not meet my eyes. That hurt more than anything. Ethan suddenly stood. I'm not hungry. Claire frowned. Ethan. He looked at me, then he ran upstairs. No one moved. No one spoke. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly. Claire reached for her wine. We're all family here. No, I said quietly. The entire table looked at me. No, we're not acting like family. My voice remained calm, perhaps too calm, because when anger disappears, people become frightened. Claire crossed her arms. I think you're overreacting. I picked up the brochure. Did you buy this for me? Yes. Did I ask for it? No. Have I told anyone I intend to leave my home? She hesitated. No. Then why would you place this under my Christmas tree? Claire's expression hardened. Because someone has to think practically. There it was. The truth. Not concern, not love, practicality. As if I were a problem to solve. As if grief had become inconvenience. As if old age automatically surrendered ownership. Michael pushed back his chair. Can we stop? Claire looked at him. We need to talk about these things. Not tonight. Then when? I stood slowly. My hands shook. Not from fear. From disappointment. I need some air. Claire sighed. Autumn, please don't make this dramatic. I looked at her. I didn't bring a brochure to your dinner. She opened her mouth but said nothing. I walked into the kitchen. The casserole sat untouched. David's favorite dish. No one had served it. No one had even noticed. I covered it with foil. Outside, snow continued falling. I put on my coat. Inside the pocket rested the folder containing the deed. For a moment, my fingers touched the papers. Protection. David's word returned again. Behind me, I heard voices, laughter returning, people pretending nothing had happened. I suddenly realized something. They all expected me to absorb this, to smile, to forgive, to continue being grateful for my own erasure. But something inside me had begun to wake up. I stepped toward the front door. Claire appeared behind me. Where are you going? To pick up the pie I ordered. You can wait. I need some air. She folded her arms. Dinner isn't finished. Neither was I. Outside, the cold hit my face. I walked slowly toward my car while snow settled across the windshield. Inside the house, Christmas lights glowed warmly through the windows. The people inside looked comfortable, safe, certain. None of them knew the old deed rested in my coat pocket. None of them knew David had already prepared for the day someone forgot whose house they were sitting in. And as I drove toward the bakery, I could not stop thinking about the brochure under my tree. A Christmas gift telling me to leave. I had spent 37 years building that home, and for the first time in my life, I wondered whether my own family had already decided I was gone. The bakery was only 15 minutes away. I stayed there for almost an hour. Not because the pie took that long, because I needed time. The little bakery sat near downtown, tucked between a florist and an antique store. Christmas lights framed the windows, and an old jazz song played softly from hidden speakers. Other people were picking up desserts, laughing, carrying wrapped gifts, talking about family dinners, waiting for them at home. Home. The word felt different now. I sat alone at a small table with a cup of coffee I did not want, and stared through the window at the falling snow. Several times I considered calling Grace. Several times I considered driving somewhere else entirely. A hotel. Her house. Anywhere. But every option felt wrong. I should not have to leave my own home. Eventually, the girl behind the counter brought my pecan pie. "Merry Christmas," she said. I smiled politely. "Merry Christmas." When I stepped outside, the cold air bit through my gloves. Snow had begun covering the roads. The town looked beautiful in the way Christmas towns always do. Lights, wreaths, windows glowing with warmth. I remember thinking that other people were probably sitting down to dinner at that exact moment. Families, laughter, safe places. I drove slowly. The closer I got to the house, the tighter my chest became. When I turned onto our street, I saw the lights first. Claire had turned on every decoration. The bushes sparkled. White lights wrapped the porch railing. The wreath on the front door glowed beneath the lantern. The house looked welcoming until I reached the front steps. I balanced the pie box in one hand and the small wrapped gift for Ethan in the other. Then I entered the code. 4 numbers. The same code we had used since the electronic lock was installed 2 weeks earlier. Red light. Error. I frowned. Perhaps I had entered it incorrectly. I tried again. Red light. I entered it more carefully. Red. The lock beeped loudly. My breath clouded in front of me. Snow landed on my coat. Inside the house, I could hear laughter. Someone dropped a fork. Music played softly. I stood there for several seconds, trying to understand. Then I entered Michael's birthday. Red. I entered David's birthday. Red. I entered the emergency backup code. Nothing. For the first time, fear moved through me. Not because I was locked out, because someone had changed the code. Someone had made a decision. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Finally, footsteps approached. The door opened only a few inches because the security chain remained attached. Claire stood there. Warm light surrounded her. She still held a wine glass. For a second, she looked surprised. Then she looked irritated. "You're back." I stared at her. "My code doesn't work." She hesitated only briefly. "Oh, we changed it." The words settled between us. "We..." Claire shrugged. "The old code wasn't secure." Snow continued falling around me. "You changed the code." "Yes." "Without telling me." She shifted her weight. "We've been talking about updating things." I looked at her. This woman was standing inside my house while I stood outside holding dessert for my family. "My house," I said quietly. Claire sighed. "Autumn, not right now." "Open the door." She looked over her shoulder. I could hear voices inside. People were still eating. Nobody had noticed. We'll talk later. My heart began pounding. Open the door. She lowered her voice. You keep coming and going, and honestly, it makes things confusing. Confusing? I almost laughed. I'm locked outside. Because the code changed. You didn't tell me. We forgot. Forgot. People forget milk. People forget batteries. People do not forget to tell a homeowner that she no longer has access to her own front door. I looked past her shoulder. I could see Christmas lights, the dining room, the edge of the table, and people sitting comfortably. Then I saw Michael. He stood near the hallway. His face changed when he saw me. Mom! I raised my voice. My code doesn't work. He looked at Claire. She answered before he could. We changed it. Michael frowned. Without telling Mom, Claire's expression hardened. We discussed changing it. Not with Mom. The silence that followed told me something important. Michael had not known. For the first time that evening, I saw uncertainty in Claire's eyes. She unhooked the chain, but did not fully open the door. Can we not do this outside? I stared at her. Outside is where you left me. The words surprised even me. Behind Michael, several guests had turned to watch. Patricia stood halfway out of her chair. Howard looked uncomfortable. I heard Ethan's voice. Grandma! Claire opened the door slightly wider. Before I could step inside, another voice called from across the yard. Autumn! It was Linda Patterson. She stood on her porch, wearing a winter coat and holding a mug. She had clearly seen everything. Are you all right? I suddenly became aware of how I must look. Snow on my shoulders, pie box in one hand, Christmas gift in the other. Standing outside my own front door, Claire forced a smile. Everything's fine. Linda looked directly at me. Do you need to come over? The kindness in her voice nearly broke me. No, I said quietly. I'm fine. But I wasn't, not even close. Michael finally stepped forward. Mom, come inside. I entered slowly. The warmth hit my face. So did the silence. The entire room watched me. Nobody knew where to look. I placed the pie on the kitchen counter. Snow melted from my coat onto the floor. Ethan ran over and hugged me tightly. Grandma, where were you? I kissed his forehead. I had trouble getting in. Claire immediately spoke. It was just a misunderstanding. No, it wasn't. Because misunderstandings happen accidentally. This had required planning. Someone had opened an app, entered a new code, saved it, and never told me. Patricia finally spoke. Oh dear, technology causes so many problems. I looked at Claire. No, people do. The room became silent again. Michael rubbed his face. Claire, why didn't you tell Mom? Claire crossed her arms. We've talked about needing boundaries. Boundaries? Michael asked. Your mother comes and goes constantly. I stared at her. I live here. She met my eyes. Then prove it. The words landed like ice. For a moment, nobody breathed. Even Claire seemed surprised that she had said it. Michael looked horrified. Claire, but she continued, you act like nothing can change. You act like nobody else matters. I could feel every person in the room watching. My embarrassment slowly transformed into something else. Calm. Dangerous calm. Because suddenly, the fear disappeared. Inside my coat pocket rested the folder. The deed. David's note. Protection. I slipped my hand into my pocket and touched the papers. Not yet, But soon, very soon. I looked around the dining room, the expensive decorations, the guests, the Christmas candles, the woman who had changed my door code, the son who looked lost, the grandson who still held my hand. Nobody understood that something had changed while I stood outside in the snow. Until that moment, I had still been asking for permission. Permission to stay, permission to speak, permission to exist inside my own home. Standing outside that locked door had taken something from me, but it had also returned something. I no longer felt guilty. I no longer felt confused. I no longer wondered whether I was overreacting. Claire had answered every question. People who believe a house belongs to them eventually start acting like it does. She had changed the code because somewhere in her mind, she had already become the owner. The guests slowly returned to their seats. Conversations resumed awkwardly. Michael asked if I wanted tea. I shook my head. Claire returned to the dining room without apologizing. No one mentioned the lock, but everyone remembered it. I removed my coat, carefully, quietly. The folder remained inside the pocket. I carried it with me into the dining room. I sat down. The pie remained untouched in the kitchen. Christmas music played softly. The tree lights flickered, and for the first time all evening, I was no longer afraid of what would happen next. Because Claire had challenged me. Prove it. I lowered my hand into my coat pocket one more time and felt the edges of the old deed. The paper felt warm. David's handwriting rested only inches away, and I realized that before this night ended, someone at that table was going to discover exactly who the house belonged to. Nobody touched the pie. It sat in the kitchen exactly where I had placed it, still inside the bakery box, with melted snowdrops drying on the lid. The dining room had become strangely quiet. Even the Christmas music seemed softer now. Claire returned to her seat. Michael remained standing. Ethan sat beside me, his small hand resting against my arm, as if he sensed that if he let go, something terrible might happen. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, Howard cleared his throat. I'm sure this was all a misunderstanding. Claire immediately nodded. Exactly. I looked at her. A misunderstanding requires two people making mistakes. Her face tightened. Autumn, I've already said we changed the code. And you didn't tell me. We forgot. No, you decided. Michael finally spoke. Claire, why would you do that? She looked at him with disbelief. You agreed we needed better security. Security isn't the issue. She crossed her arms. Your mother leaves doors unlocked. I've never left a door unlocked. She comes and goes without telling anyone. The room became silent again. Something about the way Claire said anyone bothered me, as though I needed permission to leave my own house, as though I answered to a committee. Patricia leaned forward carefully. Perhaps everyone is emotional because it's Christmas. Grace had once told me that people often call women emotional when they want them to stop speaking. I folded my napkin. No, I'm emotional because I was locked outside my own home. Nobody argued with that, not even Claire. Michael finally sat down and rubbed both hands across his face. I don't understand what's happening. His voice sounded tired, older. For the first time that evening, I saw the little boy he once had been the child who ran into my arms after nightmares, the teenager who called me when his car broke down, the young father who cried when he told me he was losing his townhouse. I wanted to protect him, but I was beginning to understand that protecting Michael had become one of the reasons we were sitting here. Because every time I stayed quiet, somebody else spoke for me. Every time I accepted disrespect, someone else became stronger. Claire took a sip of wine. We've all been trying to avoid this conversation. What conversation? I asked. The future. I looked directly at her. My future. Our future. Again, our. The word had become her favorite possession. Michael stared at the table. Claire. No, Michael. We need to be honest. She turned toward me. You can't manage this house forever. There it was. Not concern. Not love. Not safety. Removal. I kept my voice calm. Who says I can't? You live alone. I don't. You struggle with stairs. I walk them every day. The property is large. I've maintained it for years. She exhaled heavily. Autumn, this isn't about fighting. No, I said quietly. It isn't. I reached for my water glass. My hands no longer shook. That surprised me. After standing outside in the snow, something inside me had become very still. Claire looked around the table. Everyone here understands that eventually houses pass to children. Howard nodded carefully. Patricia avoided my eyes. The Robertsons looked trapped. And then Michael finally spoke. Nobody is taking Mom's house. Claire turned toward him. I never said today. Today. That word hung in the air. Today. Meaning tomorrow. Meaning soon. Meaning eventually. Ethan suddenly pushed back his chair. I hate this. Everyone looked at him. Tears filled his eyes. You keep talking like Grandma's leaving. Claire softened her voice. Honey. No. He looked directly at his mother. Grandpa built this house. The room became still. Ethan rarely spoke about David in front of everyone. He told me about the tree outside. He told me about the bricks. He said Grandma and Grandpa made everything. Claire looked embarrassed. We're not saying Grandma has to leave. Then why did you change the code? Nobody answered him. Children have a remarkable ability to find the center of truth. Michael stood and placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. Buddy. But Ethan looked at me. Grandma, are you leaving? The question pierced me, because until that moment I realized I had been asking myself the same thing. Had I slowly accepted the possibility without noticing? Had months of criticism and rearranging and quiet humiliation made me prepare to disappear? I touched his hand. No. His shoulders relaxed, and for the first time all evening I heard my own answer clearly. No. Claire stood. I think everyone's tired. Perhaps she wanted the evening to end before more damage occurred. Perhaps she believed the moment would pass. Perhaps she still believed I would stay quiet. She began gathering plates. Patricia helped. The men moved into the living room. The television came on. People desperately searched for normal. I remained seated. My coat rested beside me. Inside it sat the folder. I could feel its presence, not physically, emotionally. Michael returned several minutes later. He lowered himself into the chair beside me. I'm sorry. His voice broke. I looked at him. Did you know? His eyes filled. No. Did you know about the brochure? He hesitated. That answer hurt. I knew she bought it. And I thought it was a bad idea. But you didn't stop her. He looked down. No. I nodded slowly. There are many kinds of betrayal. Some come through action. Others come through silence. I never wanted this, he whispered. What did you want? He rubbed his eyes. I wanted us together. So did I. The difference was that I had opened my home. Somewhere upstairs, I heard a door close. Claire. I imagined her speaking with her mother, explaining, complaining, preparing. Then, Michael asked something that surprised me. Mom, are you angry at me? I could have answered quickly. Yes. No. But life becomes complicated when the people who hurt us are also the people we love. I'm disappointed. He nodded. I know. No, Michael. I don't think you do. He finally looked at me. When your father died, I stayed in this house alone. Every room hurt. Every holiday hurt. Every morning hurt. But when you needed help, I opened the door. Tears appeared in his eyes. I know. I gave you a home. I know. And tonight, I stood outside it. He covered his face. I'm sorry. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question I had avoided for weeks. Did Claire ask you to talk to me about signing anything? His head lifted immediately. What? Papers. Ownership. The house. His expression changed. Fear. Actual fear. No. You swear. Mom, I swear. For the first time that evening, I believed him completely. Michael was guilty of weakness, not conspiracy. Claire, however, was another matter. The clock struck 9. Guests began gathering coats. The evening had broken. Everyone knew it. Nobody knew how to repair it. As people left, several avoided looking directly at me. Linda's porch light still glowed across the street. Snow continued falling. Howard shook my hand awkwardly. Patricia hugged me longer than usual. Perhaps she understood more than she wanted to admit. Claire thanked everyone for coming. She acted as though the evening had simply become uncomfortable. But some things cannot return to normal. When the front door finally closed, and the last guest left, only the 4 of us remained. Me, Michael, Claire, Ethan. The Christmas tree lights reflected across the living room. Nobody moved. Then Claire said quietly, "We should all get some sleep." I looked at her. "No." She frowned. "What?" "We should talk." Michael stared at me. Claire folded her arms. "Tonight?" "Yes." She looked exhausted. "So am I." I reached down and picked up my coat. Slowly, carefully. The folder inside felt heavier than paper. For months, I had allowed everyone else to decide the conversation. Tonight, for the first time, I intended to decide it myself. Because the woman who had stood outside in the snow no longer existed. And the woman sitting at that table had finally remembered something important. David had trusted her. The house belonged to her. And somewhere inside my coat rested an old deed that was about to ruin Christmas dinner completely. Nobody moved. The Christmas tree lights blinked softly against the walls, while the clock above the fireplace ticked loud enough to fill the silence. Claire remained standing near the dining room entrance. Michael sat beside me. Ethan watched all of us with frightened eyes. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, Christmas had already ended. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and felt the edge of the folder. The paper inside felt strangely warm, as though David himself had been waiting beside me all evening. Claire crossed her arms. "What exactly do you want to talk about?" I looked at her. "You asked me to prove this house is mine." Michael lowered his eyes. Claire said nothing. I slowly removed the folder. At first, nobody reacted. To them, it was only old paperwork. But my hands did not shake anymore. I opened the folder carefully and removed the first document. Claire frowned. What is that? The deed. The room became still. Michael looked up immediately. The deed? I nodded. The original deed. Claire forced a small laugh. Autumn, nobody is questioning your memories. I'm not talking about memories. I laid the document on the dining table. The same table where Claire had discussed my future. The same table where she had given me a brochure for senior housing. The same table where she had said Michael deserved the house. This is the property deed. Michael leaned forward. Claire remained standing. I looked directly at her. You asked me to prove it. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Claire shrugged. Old paperwork doesn't really mean much anymore. Michael looked at her. What? She quickly corrected herself. I mean, legally there are lots of things involved. I turned the document toward my son. Read the names. Michael adjusted his glasses. His eyes moved across the page. David Walker and Autumn Walker. I nodded. He continued reading. Then he stopped. His face changed. What is this? The transfer after your father died. He swallowed. It transferred to you. Yes. Claire finally stepped closer. She looked at the page. This doesn't mean... It means exactly what it says. My voice remained calm. I surprised myself. Months earlier, I would have cried. Tonight, I simply spoke. Michael continued reading. Sole ownership. The words hung in the room. Claire folded her arms more tightly. Well, obviously you owned the house after David passed. No. I looked at her. Not owned. Own. Silence. Because there is a difference. One belongs to the past. The other belongs to the present. I removed David's handwritten note from the folder. The paper had softened with age. The blue ink had faded slightly. I held it gently. Your father wrote this. Michael looked surprised. I've never seen it. Neither had I. I unfolded the note. My voice shook slightly as I read. Don't ever let guilt make decisions that wisdom should make. The room felt smaller. Even Claire remained quiet. I continued. This home belongs to you as much as it belongs to our memories. Michael's eyes filled with tears. He looked away. Ethan moved closer. Grandpa wrote that. Yes. I folded the note carefully. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Claire inhaled. Nobody is trying to steal your house. I looked at her. Then why did you change the code? No answer. Why did you buy me a senior housing brochure? Silence. Why have you been telling neighbors I'm leaving? Claire's face flushed. I was discussing possibilities. Without me. I was planning ahead. For me. Michael finally spoke. Claire, did you tell people Mom was moving? She looked toward him. I may have mentioned that eventually. Eventually? Her voice became defensive. What is everyone acting like Michael is her only child? That doesn't make me the owner, Michael said quietly. Claire looked shocked. You'll inherit someday. Maybe. She stared at him. Maybe. I watched my son. For the first time all evening, he seemed awake. Truly awake. He looked at the deed again. Then he looked around the room. His father's chair. The Christmas tree. The walls. His mother's face. Perhaps he finally saw what had happened. Claire's voice sharpened. Are you honestly taking her side? The words struck me, her side, as though family were teams, as though truth required choosing. Michael answered softly, "There shouldn't be sides." Claire laughed once, coldly. "Apparently there are." She looked directly at me. "So what now? You embarrass me in front of everyone?" I almost smiled, because the guests had already left. Only truth remained. "I didn't embarrass you." She stared. "You changed the lock." Silence. "You bought the brochure." Silence. "You discussed my future." Silence. "You told people I was leaving." Silence. "You asked me to prove this house belongs to me." My voice remained steady. So I did. The clock continued ticking. Ethan quietly climbed into the chair beside me. He rested his head against my shoulder. The gesture nearly broke my heart. Michael rubbed both hands across his face. "Claire, why?" Her eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I almost felt sympathy. Almost, because people who manipulate often cry when they lose control. I was trying to protect our future. Michael stared at her. "By locking my mother outside." "I didn't mean." "By talking about her moving." "I was planning." Without telling her, Claire looked at me. "You have this huge house." My chest tightened. "There it is?" "What?" "The truth." She looked confused. "The house." Her voice grew louder. "It's too much for one person." "Then why move into it?" Silence. Nobody answered, because the answer had finally entered the room. Howard's words. Property values. Investments. Future. Assets. Not family. Not grief. Not memories. Assets. Claire sat down heavily. "I just wanted stability." I looked at her. "So did I." She wiped her eyes. "We've struggled." "I know. We've had debt." "I know. We've been scared." "So have I." My voice softened. "When David died, I was terrified." She looked at me. "I spent months sleeping beside an empty pillow. I walked through rooms that still smelled like him. I ate dinner alone. I sat in this house wondering who I was without my husband." Tears slipped down my face. But when Michael needed help, I opened my door. The room remained silent. I did not open my door so somebody could close it behind me. Michael covered his eyes. Claire said nothing, because some truths leave no defense. I slid the deed back into the folder. Carefully, respectfully, the same way David would have done. Then I reached for my phone. Claire frowned. "What are you doing?" I opened my contacts. "Calling Robert Hayes?" Michael looked up. "Our lawyer." "Your father's lawyer?" Claire's face changed. "Why?" "Because I want everyone to hear the same thing." "It's Christmas." "Yes." She stared at me. "You'd call a lawyer on Christmas Eve?" I looked directly at her. "You changed my door code on Christmas Eve." Nobody spoke. I pressed the number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a familiar voice answered. "Autumn?" I switched to speaker. The entire room listened. "Robert," I said quietly. "I'm sorry to call so late." "It's all right." I looked at the people sitting around my dining table. My son, my grandson, my daughter-in-law, the Christmas lights, the remains of dinner, the empty chair that still belonged to David. I took a slow breath. "Robert," I need you to explain something to my family. And suddenly, I realized that the old deed had already done exactly what David said it would do. It had protected me. Not because of the paper itself, because it reminded me that truth does not disappear simply because someone else wants the house. And before that Christmas night ended, everyone sitting in my dining room was about to hear the truth from someone they could not argue with. The speaker on my phone crackled softly. For a moment, nobody spoke. Robert Hayes had known my family for nearly 30 years. He had prepared David's will. He had handled our refinancing decades earlier. He had sat beside me after David's funeral while I signed papers through tears. His voice carried weight. Not because he was a lawyer, because he knew the truth before any of us had started pretending. "Autumn?" he asked again. "I'm here. Is everything all right?" I looked around the room. Michael sat motionless. Claire stood near the dining room doorway. Ethan leaned against my shoulder. The Christmas lights reflected against the windows. "No," I said honestly. "Everything isn't all right." Robert's voice became softer. "Tell me what you need." I took a slow breath. "My family is here." "All right. And there seems to be confusion about my house." The room became perfectly silent. Claire folded her arms. Michael lowered his head. Robert waited. "I found the deed and the transfer documents after David passed. Could you explain who legally owns the property?" There was no hesitation. "The property belongs to you, Autumn." Nobody moved. Robert continued. "The transfer recorded after David's death placed the home solely in your ownership." "Solely." The word landed heavily. Claire spoke for the first time. "Mr. Hayes, this is Claire." His voice remained professional. "Hello, Claire." "We're family." "I understand." "Michael is her son." "Yes." She glanced toward Michael. "So, eventually the house belongs to him." Robert paused. "Eventually is not the same as legally." Nobody breathed. He continued. "At this time, the owner of the property is Autumn Walker." I could see Claire's face slowly changing. For months, she had spoken confidently, as though ownership was inevitable, as though kindness automatically became surrender, as though time itself would transfer the house. But facts can be cruel things, especially when they arrive through someone you cannot dismiss. Michael finally spoke. "Dad never added me." "No," Robert answered gently. "Was that intentional?" "Yes." I closed my eyes. Part of me had always known. David had loved Michael deeply, but he had also understood something about people, something I had spent months refusing to see. Robert continued. "David wanted to make certain that Autumn would always have security." Security. The same word Claire had used when she changed the lock. Only now I understood the difference. David wanted to protect me. Claire wanted to control me. Claire suddenly spoke. "No one is trying to take the house." Robert remained quiet for a moment. Then he asked a question. "Has anyone suggested transferring ownership?" Nobody answered. "Has anyone presented paperwork?" Still silence. I looked at Claire. She looked away. Robert's voice became more serious. "Autumn, has anyone asked you to sign documents?" I hesitated. "Not yet." Not yet. The room heard those words. Claire heard them. Michael heard them. The truth sat quietly between us. Robert spoke carefully. If anyone asks you to sign property documents, powers of attorney, transfer forms, or ownership agreements, please do not sign anything without legal review. Claire's face had gone pale. Michael looked at her. What documents? She said nothing. Robert continued. Changing locks, restricting access, or attempting to control entry to property owned by another person can create serious problems. I saw Claire's eyes widen. Especially, Robert added, if the owner was not informed. Michael slowly turned toward his wife. You changed the code. Claire looked defensive. It was temporary. Without telling my mother. Because she would have overreacted. I finally spoke. I stood outside in the snow. Her face hardened. You came back late. It's my house. You keep saying that. I stared at her. Because it's true. Robert heard enough. Autumn? Yes. Are you safe tonight? The question surprised me. I looked around the room. Michael sat frozen. Claire looked furious. Ethan looked frightened. And suddenly I realized something. For months, I had not felt safe. Not physically, emotionally, because every day had required me to defend my own existence inside my own home. I don't know, I answered honestly. Robert became quiet. If necessary, I can meet with you after Christmas. I'd appreciate that. Bring every document. I will. And Autumn? Yes. David trusted you to protect yourself. My throat tightened. I know. After we ended the call, nobody moved. The phone screen went dark. The clock ticked. Snow continued falling outside. Finally, Michael spoke. Claire? She did not answer. He tried again. Claire. What? Did you know? She looked directly at him. I knew the house was hers. Then why? Her eyes filled with tears. Because someday it will be yours. That's not your decision. She laughed bitterly. No, apparently nothing is my decision. I could see months of frustration pouring out of her. Fear, debt, anger, control. Perhaps all of it together. You don't understand, she said. Michael stared at her. Then explain. She looked at me. You have this huge house. I remained silent. We've been drowning. Michael looked confused. What are you talking about? Claire wiped her eyes. The credit cards. He frowned. What credit cards? She looked away. My heart sank. Michael's voice became quiet. What credit cards, Claire? No answer. Claire, she finally whispered. The ones from the investment. Michael stared. What investment? For the first time that evening, fear crossed Claire's face. Real fear. Because secrets had begun escaping. I was trying to fix things. What things? She swallowed. We owe money. How much? Silence. Michael stood. How much? Her voice barely emerged. 30,000. The room seemed to tilt. Michael looked stunned. We paid those bills. No. What? I used another card. He sat back down. I had never seen my son look so lost. When? She said nothing. When? Months ago. I suddenly understood. The shopping, the renovations, the conversations about property values, the future, the house. Claire had not simply wanted control. She wanted security, not emotional security, financial security. And my home had become the answer in her mind. Michael whispered, "You told me everything was fine." Tears rolled down her face. "I was trying to fix it. By taking my mother's house." "I wasn't taking it." The room no longer believed her. Not even Michael. Ethan quietly spoke. "Mom." Everyone turned. His voice shook. "Did you change the code because Grandma would leave?" Claire looked at her son. "No." "Then why?" She had no answer. Children ask the questions adults avoid. Michael stood slowly. He walked toward the front door. Without speaking, he opened the control panel beside the entrance. The electronic lock blinked. Claire watched him. "What are you doing?" He removed the batteries. The screen went dark. The house became silent. He looked at me. "I'm sorry, Mom." I could barely breathe. Not because the lock mattered, because he had finally seen it. The code, the brochure, the missing photographs, the rearranged furniture, the comments, the assumptions. The lock had never been about security. It had been about ownership. And for the first time, Michael understood. Claire sat down heavily. The fight had left her. The confidence had vanished. The woman who had challenged me to prove ownership now sat staring at the table. The deed had done exactly what David intended. It had separated truth from assumption, protection from control, love from entitlement. I looked at Michael. He looked broken. I looked at Claire. She looked frightened. I looked at Ethan. He still sat beside me. Then I looked toward David's empty chair. 37 Christmases, 37 years, and somehow even after his death, he had still protected me. Because long before Claire changed the code, long before she bought the brochure, long before she started speaking about the future, David had understood something I had not. Love and ownership are not the same thing, and that old deed resting quietly inside its folder had just destroyed every lie sitting at my Christmas table. Nobody slept that night. At least, I did not. After the conversation ended, Michael helped Ethan upstairs. The boy had cried quietly while brushing his teeth, and hearing it through the hallway nearly broke my heart. Claire disappeared into the guest room. She did not say goodnight. She did not apologize. The confidence that had carried her through months of rearranging my house had finally disappeared, leaving behind only silence. I remained in the living room. The Christmas tree still glowed. Presents still rested beneath its branches. David's old ornament, a small wooden cardinal, hung near the center of the tree. He had bought it during our 20th Christmas together, because I once told him cardinals made me feel as though lost people were visiting. That night, I stared at the ornament for a long time. Around midnight, Michael came downstairs. He looked exhausted, older. The past few hours had added years to his face. He sat across from me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I didn't know." I believed him. That was perhaps the hardest part. Claire had manipulated the situation, but Michael had allowed it. Weakness can damage people almost as much as cruelty. "I know," I said. He rubbed his hands together. "When did all of this happen?" I looked around the room. "The day I stopped correcting people." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means every time Claire moved something, I stayed quiet. Every time she spoke for me, I stayed quiet. Every time she made decisions, I told myself it wasn't important." His eyes lowered. "And me," I took a breath. "You wanted peace." "I wanted everyone together." "I know." He looked toward the staircase. "She's been worried about money." "I understand that." I've been working overtime. I know. His voice became smaller. I thought she was just trying to make the house feel like home. I looked at him carefully. Did it ever occur to you that it was already someone's home? The question hurt him. I could see it, because Michael loved me. That had never changed. But love sometimes becomes buried under stress, marriage debt, responsibility, and fear. He finally whispered, "I'm sorry." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You are my son." He nodded. "But you're also a husband." His eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to fix this." Neither did I. At 1 o'clock in the morning, we both went upstairs. For the first time in months, I locked my bedroom door. Not because I was afraid, because I needed a boundary. The next morning arrived quietly. Christmas Day. Sunlight reflected off fresh snow. The house felt completely different. Normally, Christmas morning belonged to laughter, coffee, music, presents. This year, the silence arrived first. I woke early, old habits again. When I entered the kitchen, Claire was already there. She sat alone at the table holding a cup of coffee. She looked tired. The dark circles beneath her eyes had deepened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "I didn't sleep." I poured coffee. "Neither did I." The silence stretched. Finally, she looked at me. "I never wanted to hurt you." I sat down. "Then what did you want?" Her eyes moved toward the window. "Stability," the same word again. "Michael doesn't tell you everything." "I know." "We've had problems." "I know." She swallowed. I was scared. For the first time since she moved into my home, Claire looked less like an enemy and more like a frightened woman. Fear changes people. Debt changes people. Desperation changes people. But those things do not excuse cruelty. She continued. When Ethan got sick last year, the bills started growing. I remembered the hospital visits, the treatments, the insurance arguments. Michael had assured me they were managing. Perhaps they had not been. Claire looked down. The credit cards got worse. "Why didn't you tell us?" She laughed softly. "Because people my age are supposed to have everything together." I understood that feeling. Most people do. She wiped her eyes. I started looking at the house differently. I waited. It seemed so big. There it was. Again. The house. Not memories, not David, not family. The house. She looked at me. "You had security." I felt something tighten inside me. "No." She frowned. "I didn't." Her eyes lifted. "When David died, I lost my security." She remained quiet. "I stayed because I was afraid too." For the first time, she looked surprised. "I thought you stayed because you wanted to be alone." I almost smiled. "I stayed because I didn't know who I was anymore." The kitchen became quiet. Outside, snow covered the yard David had once shoveled every winter. Finally, Claire whispered, "I thought eventually the house would become Michael's. Maybe someday. And then we'd finally be okay." I looked at her carefully. "And if I wasn't?" She lowered her eyes. That answer hurt us both. Before either of us could speak again, footsteps entered the kitchen. Michael. He stopped when he saw us sitting together. Nobody spoke. Then Ethan appeared. He carried a wrapped gift. He walked directly to me. "This is yours." His voice sounded nervous. I smiled. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." I opened the package carefully. Inside sat a small wooden frame. The picture inside nearly stopped my breathing. It was David, me, Michael, and little Ethan. The photograph had been taken 7 years earlier in the backyard. On the bottom, Ethan had written, "Our house." Tears filled my eyes immediately. I made it at school. I hugged him tightly. "Thank you." He looked around the room. "Can everybody stop fighting now? Children always ask the hardest questions." Michael sat beside his son. Claire remained quiet. Nobody knew how to answer, because some damage cannot disappear overnight. After breakfast, the presents remained unopened. Nobody seemed interested. The Christmas music stayed off. At 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. We all looked up. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Grace stood there carrying cinnamon rolls. She looked from my face to the others behind me. "Should I come back?" I laughed for the first time in days. "No." She entered. Within 10 minutes, she understood that everything had changed. Grace had a gift for reading rooms. She hugged Michael. She smiled at Ethan. She nodded politely toward Claire. Then she sat beside me. "You look tired." "I am." She glanced toward the dining room. "The deed did its job." I nodded. She smiled softly. David would approve. Later, while everyone occupied themselves quietly, Grace and I sat on the back porch wrapped in blankets. Snow covered the yard. The old maple tree stood bare against the sky. Grace finally asked the question I had avoided. "What happens now?" I looked through the window. Michael was helping Ethan build a toy. Claire sat alone. "I don't know." "Do you want them to leave?" The answer surprised me. "No." She looked at me carefully. "Are you sure?" "I don't want punishment." "What do you want?" I watched my family through the glass. For the first time in months, I could see them clearly. Not owners, not guests, simply people. Broken people, afraid people, people who had forgotten things. "I want respect." Grace nodded. "That's different. Very different. Because houses can be shared, love can be shared, meals can be shared. But respect cannot exist unless everyone chooses it." As afternoon sunlight stretched across the snow, I realized something important. The old deed had not saved my house. It had saved my voice. And now the hardest part still remained. Not proving ownership. Deciding what kind of family would still be living under that roof after Christmas ended. The day after Christmas felt strangely quiet. The storm had passed. Not the snow outside. The storm inside the house. For the first time in months, nobody pretended. Nobody talked about renovations. Nobody mentioned the future. Nobody spoke about ownership. Truth had entered the house, and truth has a way of rearranging everything. I woke before sunrise and walked into the kitchen. Snow covered the backyard in a smooth white blanket. The maple tree stood silent, its branches heavy with ice. David used to love mornings after snowstorms. He always said fresh snow made the world honest because every footprint became visible. That morning, I thought about footprints. The ones people leave inside a family. The ones words leave. The ones silence leaves. I made coffee. A few minutes later, Michael entered the kitchen. He looked terrible. He had probably slept even less than I had. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning." He sat down. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Claire and I argued most of the night." I nodded. "I figured." He rubbed his eyes. "I didn't know about the debt." "I believe you." He looked relieved, then ashamed. "I should have known." I poured him coffee. "Maybe." He stared into the cup. "I keep replaying everything." So do I. His voice cracked. Mom, how long have you been unhappy here? The question hurt because I had spent months pretending. A while. He lowered his head. Why didn't you tell me? I almost smiled. I did. He looked confused. When I asked where my chair went, when your father's picture disappeared, when your wife called this house yours, when I sat alone, his eyes filled. I thought they were little things. They were. I looked toward the window. Until they weren't. Upstairs, a door closed. Claire. Neither of us spoke. At 9 o'clock, Grace arrived. She carried a bakery box and a notebook. Michael managed a weak smile. Grace hugged him. Rough Christmas? He nodded. Worst one of my life. She looked at me. Not necessarily. I raised an eyebrow. How so? She smiled gently. Sometimes the worst Christmas is the one where everybody finally tells the truth. By late morning, Robert Hayes arrived. He had driven over after church. Seeing him walk through the front door felt strangely comforting. He was older now, thinner, slower, but his eyes remained sharp. He shook my hand. Autumn. He hugged Michael. He smiled at Ethan. Then he looked at Claire. Claire. Nobody knew where to sit. Finally, we gathered around the dining room table. The same table, the same room. But now, everything felt different. Robert placed his briefcase beside him. I understand there have been some misunderstandings. Nobody answered. He looked toward me. Would you like me to review the documents? I handed him the folder. He examined every page carefully. Nobody spoke while he read. At last, he removed his glasses. The ownership documents are very clear. Claire stared at the table. Robert continued. Autumn is the sole legal owner of this property. Michael nodded slowly. Robert looked toward him. Your father intentionally arranged it this way. Michael swallowed. Why? Robert folded his hands. Because he loved your mother. Silence. He wanted to guarantee her security. The word returned again. Security, not for children, not for future generations. For me. Robert continued. There are no shared ownership rights. There are no transfer agreements. There are no inheritance changes. He looked directly at Claire. And there is certainly no authority for anyone else to make housing decisions on Autumn's behalf. Claire's face reddened. She finally spoke. I wasn't trying to steal the house. Robert remained calm. What were you trying to do? She opened her mouth, then closed it, because the answer sounded ugly when spoken aloud. Michael finally said it. You wanted control. Claire looked at him. No. He shook his head. You changed the lock. She looked down. You bought the brochure. Silence. You told people Mom was moving. Tears appeared in her eyes. Robert spoke gently. Financial stress causes people to make poor decisions. Claire whispered. We owe money. I understand. I was scared. Robert nodded. So was Autumn when her husband died. The room became still. Fear did not belong only to younger people. Loss does not belong only to older people. Everyone carries something. But not everyone chooses the same response. Robert finally closed the folder. Autumn. Yes. What would you like to happen? Every person at the table looked at me. For months, decisions had been made around me. About me, without me. Now everyone waited. I took a long breath. I want the house back. Nobody spoke. Claire looked confused. What does that mean? I looked around the room. My pictures go back. My chair goes back. My husband's things stay where they belong. I looked directly at Claire. My code belongs to me. Tears rolled down her face. I continued. And nobody discusses my future except me. Silence. Michael nodded. That's fair. Claire said nothing. I turned toward Robert. I also want all access returned. He nodded. Smart lock access? Everything. The house. The accounts. The passwords. The systems. Everything. Robert looked toward Claire. That would be appropriate. Claire wiped her eyes. I understand. But I wasn't finished. I surprised myself, because for months I had avoided conflict. Now the words arrived naturally. I also need boundaries. Michael looked up. What kind? I looked at my son. No more speaking for me. He nodded. No more decisions without me. Another nod. Then I looked at Claire. No more treating me like a guest. Tears continued falling down her face. I never wanted, I interrupted gently. But you did. Nobody argued, because intentions matter, but actions matter more. Robert stood. I think you've all had enough honesty for one Christmas. Even Michael laughed slightly. As Robert prepared to leave, he handed me one of his business cards. Call me after New Year's. Why? We should update your estate plan. The room became quiet. Michael looked down. Claire looked away. Robert continued. Not because of this. He smiled gently. Because clarity prevents pain. I understood. David had understood too. After he left, the house became quiet again. Late that afternoon, Claire came to my bedroom door. She knocked softly. I invited her in. She stood near the doorway. Smaller, somehow, less certain. I think I should leave for a while. The words surprised me. Leave? She nodded. My sister said I can stay with her. I studied her. She looked exhausted. I don't want Ethan to see us fighting. I remained silent. She looked around my room, at the photographs, at David's old watch, at the blanket folded on the chair. For perhaps the first time, she truly saw my life. I didn't understand. No. She wiped her eyes. I thought this was just a house. I looked at the picture beside my bed. David smiling beside me. No. Her voice shook. I'm sorry. I believed she meant it, but apologies do not immediately repair trust. Sometimes they simply begin the work. That evening, Michael helped her pack a suitcase. Ethan cried. Claire cried. Michael looked broken. The house felt heavy. Before leaving, Claire walked toward the front door. Then she turned toward me. I really was scared. I nodded. So was I. She looked down. I just forgot that. After she left, the house became quiet. Not peaceful, not yet, but honest. Michael sat in the living room. Ethan fell asleep beside him. The Christmas tree still glowed. The old smart lock remained dark. And for the first time in many months, nobody in the house questioned whether I belonged there. Because the truth had finally become stronger than fear. And although Christmas had broken my family apart, I was beginning to understand something important. Sometimes things fall apart because they were built on silence, and sometimes they begin healing only after someone finally says no. Claire stayed with her sister for almost a week. The house became quiet again. Not the lonely kind of quiet I had lived with after David died. A different quiet, The kind that comes after a storm when broken branches still lie in the yard and nobody knows yet which trees survived. Michael returned to work 2 days after Christmas. He left early, came home late, and spoke very little. Ethan returned to school and tried very hard to act normal. Only children have the courage to keep loving people while adults are still deciding how angry they want to be. Every afternoon, he sat beside me in the living room. My chair had returned. Michael carried it upstairs from the basement himself. He cleaned it, repaired one loose leg, placed it beside the window exactly where it had always stood. He also returned David's photograph to the mantel. The lace curtains came back. The old ceramic Santa returned. One by one, pieces of my life found their places again. The house slowly began breathing. One evening, Michael carried 3 storage bins upstairs. He placed them beside me. I didn't know these were down there. I opened the first box. Inside sat David's fishing hat, our wedding album, the cross-stitch my mother had made, Christmas ornaments, photographs, 30 years of memories packed into plastic containers. For several minutes, I could not speak. Michael sat beside me. I'm sorry. I touched the edge of the album. So am I. He looked confused. For what? For allowing silence to become larger than love. He lowered his head. I failed you. I shook my head. No. He looked at me. You opened your house. Yes. And I let you become a guest. I thought carefully before answering. Claire did not do that alone. He nodded slowly. Because that was the truth. Claire had been the stronger personality, but Michael had stepped aside. Sometimes people do terrible things. Sometimes people simply allow terrible things to happen. Both leave wounds. A few days later, Claire called. I almost let the phone ring. Almost, but I answered. Hello? Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Hi. Several seconds passed. How are you? The question surprised me. Tired. She laughed softly. Me too. Silence. Finally, she said, Can I come by? I looked toward the living room. David's picture had returned. The house felt like itself again. I don't know. I understand. Another silence. Then she whispered, I need to apologize. Apologies. People often imagine apologies repair things immediately. They don't. They simply open doors. After thinking for a long moment, I said, Come tomorrow. The next afternoon, Claire arrived alone. No makeup, no perfect clothes, no confidence. She stood in the doorway holding nothing. No gifts, no flowers, no excuses. That mattered. I invited her inside. She stopped when she saw the room. My chair, the curtains, the photographs, the old decorations. She looked around quietly. It looks different. No. I looked at her. It looks familiar. Tears filled her eyes. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where she once spoke about modernizing my life. For several minutes, neither of us knew how to begin. Finally, she spoke. My father was laid off when I was 13. I listened. We lost our house. Her eyes stayed on the table. My mother never recovered from it. I had never heard this story. She continued. I remember moving boxes, packing things, watching strangers walk through our home. She swallowed. I promised myself I would never feel that powerless again. The room became quiet. Fear. Again. Everything seemed to return to fear. I saw this house, she said softly. The neighborhood, The value, the security. I nodded, and I started thinking if something happened to Michael or me, we'd be safe. She looked up. I convinced myself that someday meant soon. And me. Tears rolled down her face. I stopped seeing your fear. That answer hurt because it was true. People become dangerous when they only see their own pain. She wiped her eyes. When you stood outside in the snow, I knew immediately what I'd done. I remained quiet. I just couldn't admit it. She looked around the kitchen. I don't know why I changed the code. I did. Control, fear, ownership. But sometimes people must discover their own answers. She reached into her purse. I brought something. She placed a small envelope on the table. Inside was a handwritten letter. I couldn't say everything. I looked at it. You don't have to read it now. I nodded. She stood to leave. Then she stopped. I'll understand if you never trust me again. I answered honestly. Trust takes longer than apology. She nodded. As she reached the front door, she turned. I'm sorry I treated your memories like furniture. After she left, I sat alone for a long time. Then I opened the letter. She wrote about fear, debt, shame, pride, the pressure to provide, the embarrassment of financial problems, the envy she felt seeing the stability David and I had built. One sentence stayed with me. I wanted the safety your house represented because I didn't know how to build my own. I folded the letter carefully. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but understanding. That evening, Michael came home. She stopped by. Yes. How did it go? I thought carefully. Honest. He sat down. She wants to come home. The words hung between us. Home. Which home? Whose home? I looked at my son. Do you? He looked exhausted. I want my family together. And your wife. I love her. And me. He looked wounded. Mom. No answer. His eyes filled. I love you too. I nodded. Then understand something. He listened. This house is not a prize. He said nothing. It isn't security. It isn't debt relief. It isn't inheritance. His eyes remained fixed on me. It is home. I stood and walked toward David's picture. Your father and I built this life one payment at a time. I looked back at him. If people stay here, they stay because we love each other. He nodded slowly. Not because they expect ownership. Yes. Several days later, Ethan came into my room. Grandma. Yes. Is Mom coming home? Children always ask directly. I don't know. He sat beside me. I miss her. I know. He looked at David's photograph. Grandpa would want everybody together. I smiled softly. Probably. He thought for a moment. But he wouldn't want you sad. No, he wouldn't. That night, I sat alone beside the window in my old chair. Snow had begun melting. The neighborhood lights reflected against wet streets. David's note rested beside me. Don't let guilt make decisions that wisdom should make. For weeks, I had thought the story was about ownership, the deed, the house, the lock. But perhaps it was really about something else. Boundaries, respect, memory, and the difference between helping someone and disappearing for them. The next morning, I called Claire. She answered immediately. "Hello. You can come home." Silence, then tears. But before she could speak, I continued. "We're going to have rules." Her breathing shook. "I understand. No decisions without me." "Yes." "No discussions about my future." "Yes." "No changes to this house without agreement." "Yes." "And one more thing." She waited. "This is my home." Her voice broke. "I know." For the first time in many months, I believed she truly did. Claire returned home on the first Saturday of January. Snow had mostly disappeared by then. The front yard looked gray and wet, and the Christmas decorations had begun coming down around the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, I stood at my front window waiting for a car. Not because I was afraid, because I wanted to know how I felt. When Michael's car pulled into the driveway, Ethan climbed out first. He ran toward the front door carrying his backpack and nearly slipped on the wet sidewalk. Claire stepped out slowly. She looked nervous. The woman who had once rearranged my furniture and changed my door code now stood outside the house, uncertain whether she belonged there. Perhaps that was necessary, because I had spent months feeling exactly the same way. When she entered, she stopped near the doorway. "This still feels strange." I nodded. "It does." The old electronic lock had been removed completely. Michael had installed a regular deadbolt 2 days earlier. 3 keys existed. One for me, one for Michael, one for emergencies. No secret codes, no applications, no ownership hidden inside numbers. Claire noticed immediately. "You changed it." "I did." She nodded. "I understand." That sentence became very important during the following weeks. "I understand." She said it often. When I moved David's books back into the study. When I restored old photographs. When I replaced the dining room centerpiece. When I put my husband's chair exactly where it had always belonged. No arguments, no discussions, only understanding. But forgiveness does not happen because people behave well for several days. Trust grows slowly, sometimes painfully. One afternoon, Grace came for lunch. She watched Claire setting the table. She watched Michael repairing the loose cabinet hinge. She watched Ethan doing homework beside me. When Claire walked into the kitchen, Grace leaned closer. "How are you really doing?" I thought carefully. "I don't know." She smiled. "That's honest." I looked toward the dining room. Claire laughed at something Ethan said. The sound surprised me, because for weeks the house had forgotten laughter. Grace stirred her coffee. "Do you trust her?" "No." "Will you?" "I don't know." Grace nodded. "That's fair." She always appreciated truth. After lunch, she helped me pack away Christmas decorations. While wrapping David's ornaments, she looked at me. "Have you updated your paperwork?" I sighed. "Robert is coming Tuesday." "Good." She continued wrapping tissue paper around a glass angel. "People think estate planning is about money." "It isn't," she smiled. "It's about clarity." Clarity. Another word that had entered my life. David had left clarity. Robert wanted clarity. And perhaps my family needed it most of all. Tuesday arrived cold and windy. Robert came carrying a leather folder. Michael sat beside me. Claire asked if she should join us. I hesitated, then nodded. We sat around the dining room table, the same table where everything had fallen apart. Robert reviewed my documents, the deed, the insurance, the will, the accounts, David's letter. After nearly an hour, he folded his hands. Autumn, there are several options. I listened carefully. You can leave the house to Michael. Michael looked uncomfortable. You can place it into a trust. Claire looked down. You can establish conditions. The room became quiet. Robert looked at me. What do you want? Months earlier, I would have answered immediately. Michael. Everything to Michael. Simple, automatic. Because mothers often believe love means giving. Now I understood something different. Love sometimes means teaching. I looked at my son. I want this house to stay a home. Nobody spoke. Robert nodded. That's possible. Michael looked at me. Mom, I continued, I want Ethan protected. Tears appeared in Michael's eyes. I want this family to remain together if possible. Claire lowered her head. But I never want anyone to feel the way I felt. Silence. I looked directly at Claire. No one gets pushed out. Her eyes filled immediately. Robert made notes. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. When he finally left, something had changed. Not legally, emotionally, because uncertainty had disappeared. Nobody had to guess. Nobody had to assume. Nobody had to wait for someone to die before discussing life. That evening, Michael sat beside me in the living room. I never wanted the house. I believed him. I know. He looked around. Honestly, I just wanted you. My eyes filled, because perhaps that had been true all along. He had wanted his mother. Claire had wanted security. Ethan wanted his family, and I had wanted respect. Sometimes people fight over the wrong thing. A few days later, Ethan came home carrying a school assignment, family heritage. He placed the paper on the kitchen table. I need help. Claire smiled. What do you need? He looked around the room. Pictures? We spent the entire evening opening old albums. David in military uniform, our wedding, Michael as a child, family vacations, birthdays, Christmases. Claire sat quietly beside me. She stopped at one photograph. David and I standing in front of the house 30 years earlier. The yard was unfinished, the porch incomplete. We looked exhausted and happy. She touched the picture carefully. You built all this. I nodded. We did. She looked around the room. For the first time, I truly believed she understood. Not property, work, sacrifice, years. One night, after everyone went upstairs, I found Claire standing beside David's photograph. She looked embarrassed. I'm sorry. You already said that. She nodded. I know. She looked at the picture. I wish I had met him differently. I smiled softly. He would have liked you. Her eyes filled. Maybe not after Christmas. I almost laughed. No. For the first time, we both laughed. Small, quiet, human. Then she said something I never expected. When you were standing outside, I saw my mother. I looked at her. When we lost our house. Her voice shook. I became 13 years old again, and suddenly, everything made sense. Not the choices, not the cruelty, but the fear. Fear had been living inside her for years. It had simply found my house. I touched her hand. You don't have to be 13 anymore, she cried. And perhaps for the first time, so did I. Not because of anger, not because of betrayal, because healing sometimes hurts differently. The following Sunday, our family attended church together. People looked at us, The neighborhood had heard. Neighborhoods always hear. Afterward, Linda Patterson stopped me outside. "How are you?" I looked toward my family. Michael was helping Ethan. Claire stood nearby. The winter sun reflected against melting snow. I thought carefully. "Better?" She smiled. "I'm glad." That evening, I sat alone in David's chair. His note rested beside me. The house was quiet, but not lonely. Upstairs, I could hear Ethan laughing. Michael and Claire were talking softly. The sound carried through the vents. Normal sounds. Family sounds. I looked toward David's photograph. Perhaps he had known all along. A deed can protect a house, but only truth can protect a family. And after everything that had happened, the brochure, the lock, the snow, the old papers, I realized something. The greatest gift David left me was not ownership. It was permission. Permission to speak. Permission to stay. Permission to matter. And because I finally used that permission, my family had one last chance to become a family again. Spring arrived quietly. The snow disappeared. The maple tree outside my front window began growing new leaves, and the uneven brick walkway David had built years ago once again needed repair after winter frost. Some mornings, I still expected to hear him in the garage. Grief never completely leaves. It simply learns how to sit beside you. 3 months had passed since Christmas. 3 months since I stood outside my own front door holding a pecan pie while my family sat inside. Sometimes, the memory still returned unexpectedly. A red light. Falling snow. Claire's face behind the door. But the memory no longer controlled me. Because the woman who stood outside that night was not the same woman sitting in her favorite chair on a warm April morning. I had found my voice, and strangely enough, my family had found theirs too. Michael started attending financial counseling. He and Claire sold several things they no longer needed. They paid off some of the debt and created a budget together. For the first time in years, they began talking honestly about money. No more secrets, no more hidden credit cards, no more pretending. Claire found part-time work at a local accounting office. The first paycheck she brought home, she placed an envelope on the kitchen table. "What is this?" I asked. She smiled nervously. "Rent." I looked at her. "You don't have to." "Yes," she said quietly. "I do." Inside was a small amount. Not enough to change my life, but enough to change hers. Because it was respect. I pushed half of it back toward her. "We'll call it household expenses." Tears appeared in her eyes. "Thank you." Months earlier, she had wanted ownership. Now, she simply wanted belonging. There is a difference. Ethan changed too. Children often heal faster than adults. He began sitting beside me every afternoon while I gardened. Together we planted tomatoes behind the garage. We repaired the flower beds David once cared for. One afternoon he asked, "Grandma, are you still mad about Christmas?" I thought carefully. "No." "What are you then?" I smiled. "Wiser." He laughed. "That's an old person answer." "Exactly." He sat beside me for a while. Then he said something that stayed with me. "I'm glad you stayed." I looked at him. So am I. Because that was the truth. I had almost disappeared. Not physically, emotionally. And if the deed had never existed, perhaps I would have surrendered simply to keep peace. That thought frightened me. One Saturday morning, Michael and I repaired the loose bricks along the front walkway. The same bricks David had laid decades earlier. We worked quietly. At one point, Michael sat back and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Dad would make fun of us." I laughed. "He'd say we're doing it wrong." Michael smiled. He always said the house belonged to both of you. I looked at the front porch. He was right. Michael became quiet. After a moment, he said, I never wanted the house. I looked at him. I know. I wanted my parents. The words hurt because they were true. Children sometimes mistake property for security. Parents sometimes mistake sacrifice for love, and grief often confuses both. I placed another brick into the ground. You still have your mother, he nodded, and you still have your son. The repairs took all afternoon. When we finished, the walkway looked almost identical to the way David left it. Not perfect, but strong. That evening, we sat outside together. Me, Michael, Claire, Ethan. The sun slowly disappeared behind the neighborhood houses. For the first time in a very long time, nobody talked about ownership. Nobody discussed the future. Nobody made plans for someone else's life. We simply sat together. Later, Claire brought me something. It was a small wooden box. Inside were several photographs she had collected from the storage bins. Pictures of David, pictures of me, pictures of our family. She had arranged them carefully. At the bottom sat a handwritten note. Thank you for letting me learn what home really means. I looked at her. She looked terrified, as though my answer mattered greatly. It took me too long to understand, she said. I nodded. It took me too long to speak. Both things were true. A few weeks later, Robert visited again. He reviewed the updated estate documents. Everything had been completed. Everything was clear. No assumptions, no confusion, no secrets. As he prepared to leave, he stood beside David's photograph. He would be proud. I smiled. Of whom? Robert looked around the room. All of you. After he left, I sat alone in the living room. The afternoon sun entered through the lace curtains. My chair rested beside the window. David's picture sat above the fireplace. The house finally felt complete again. Not because everything was perfect, because everything was honest. I took out David's note one final time. The paper had become soft from handling. The words remained clear. Don't ever let guilt make decisions that wisdom should make. I finally understood. For months, I had confused kindness with surrender, love with silence, peace with disappearing. But wisdom had asked something different. Stay, speak, matter. One evening, near the beginning of summer, Ethan asked if we could have dinner outside. So we carried folding chairs into the backyard. Claire made lemonade. Michael grilled hamburgers. The fireflies appeared as darkness fell. At one point, Ethan raised his glass. To Grandpa. Everyone became quiet. He smiled. And to Grandma. My eyes filled immediately. Why me? He grinned. Because you won. I laughed softly. No. He frowned. You didn't. I looked around the yard, at my son, at my daughter-in-law, at my grandson, at the house David and I built, at the family that had almost broken. No, sweetheart. What happened then? I thought carefully. Because this story had never truly been about winning. Not the deed, not the house, not the lock, not the Christmas dinner. It had been about something much simpler. I remembered who I was. The evening grew quiet. The fireflies drifted across the yard. And somewhere in that silence, I felt David. Not his grief, not his pain, as gratitude, because years earlier he had placed an old deed inside an envelope and written a simple note. He had trusted me to protect myself. He had trusted me to stay. And on a cold Christmas night, when I stood outside my own front door while snow fell around me, that trust finally brought me home.